Hey everyone, this is Diesel from Imagine Your Goddess, and here in my dark, sultry cave, I decided to bring you a new deck profile. This deck profile is actually for Goddess of the Sun, Amaterasu. We've been getting a little bit of requests about this deck. I have a couple things to say on different types of builds, but for now I'm just going to go ahead and talk about the build that I have right now and how well it works. I start off this deck with Little Witch Lulu. Little Witch Lulu is the Soulless Vanguard as well. What it does is when you ride grade 3, pull it out to rear, and if you pull it out to rear from Soul, you can Soul Blast 2 Oracle Think Tanks to draw 1 card. It's very useful in getting that draw going and getting that advantage when things are a little thin. Okay, moving into triggers, I run 5 draw triggers and 7 critical triggers. I like this setup. This is one of my favorite kind of setups for trigger values because it applies the right amount of pressure while still allowing me to draw. This deck does not have the draw effects that Soulless or other Oracle Think Tank builds do, so I tend to run 5 draw just to get some things going. Then, of course, I run 4 heal. 4 heal is 4 heal. Let's move into the grade 1, shall we? As usual in our meta, I run 4 copies of the Perfect Guard. Battle Sister Chocolate is very, very useful. I run 4 copies. Then I run 3 copies of Battle Maiden Sayori Hime. So Yorihime is the 10k attacker when you have an Amaterasu Vanguard. It's not as useful as some of the 10k attackers tend to be, but it does allow you to have an attacker with a grade 1, which is more than other grade 1s in this deck can say. Then I run 3 copies of the AK Vanilla, Oracle Guardian Gemini. I like Oracle Guardian. If I could run 4, I would. I don't have the space in my mind because you need to have a lot of grade 2s for when your opponent figures out what you're doing. In single match, you could probably get away with running 1 less Sayori Hime and 1 more Gemini. But in a best 2 of 3, you want to keep them on their toes, and an AK booster does that. Or Sayori Hime does that, my apologies. Then I run 2 Milks and 2 White Hair of Inaba. Okay, now Milk is Milk, the 10k booster if you have 4 or more cards. You will generally stay steady at 4 or more cards, so go ahead and run Milk because it makes your Goddess of the Sun a 23k. Formidable number. White Hair of Inaba's skill is like Dream Painter and Nightmare Painter and all those cards. When it's placed on the Vanguard or Rear Guard, if you have an Oracle Think Tank Vanguard, you choose 1 Oracle Think Tank from your hand, up to 1, and put it into your soul. Now, there's lots of uses for that in this deck. As everyone knows, CEO has a Mega Blast. I'll go over that in a little while. But if you are in dire need of trying to get the Soul Charge off to get the Mega Blast, you can use CEO's ability when you use Inaba to put a card into Soul. Also, if you end up writing Goddess of the Sun first, which you will on occasion, you can put a CEO into your Soul with Inaba's effect and make the cross-ride happen even though you didn't officially cross-ride. This is a very useful thing for this deck. As I explain the strategy later, you'll come to know why. That is the grade 1s. Okay, moving into the grade 2s, we have 4 copies of Silent Tom. Like most Oracle Think Tank decks, in the end, Silent Tom tends to do you a lot of good. He is an 8k. When he attacks, your opponent cannot guard with 1s or 0s, grade 0s in their hand, so they can't use 10k shields. They have to rely on their perfect shields or their boosters and their interceptors. Always useful. I run 4 for consistency's sake. Then I run 4 copies of Battle Deity Susanoo. Susanoo is a 12k attacker for Amaterasu's. When it attacks, it becomes a 12k, as long as you have an Amaterasu as a vanguard. Again, this is just strictly to hit numbers. Inaba is not a great card as a booster by itself, but behind this, that's an 18k column. It gives you something to hit those cross rides. And since cross rides are becoming more and more common in every meta, it's something to think about. Finally, I run 3 copies of Oracle Guardian Wiseman, the 10k vanilla. Originally, I was running 3 copies of Taikitsu Hime, the 9k attacker. That's a 12k attacker if you have 6 or more cards in Soul. But since I'm using Lulu, I often do not have 6 cards in Soul. And there's no reason to waste the time trying to get 6 cards in Soul when you can just as quickly put out Goddess of the Sun, make it a 13k, and have a 10k. Also, if you get to ride this, that's optimal for you because you have the abilities of your other creatures on the rear guard. Okay, finally, we'll talk about the grade 3s. Okay, for me, I run 4 copies of Goddess of the Sun and 4 copies of CEO Amaterasu. These cards are the bread and butter of this deck, and it is the reason that you would run Goddess of the Sun. You run 4 CEOs to make it so that you can hit the cross ride better. And you run 4 Goddess of the Sun for the same reason, consistency. Now let me talk about each of these individually. CEO's abilities are many. She has an ability that if you have 4 or more cards, she's a 14k on your turn. She has an ability that at the beginning of your turn, you may soul charge one, and then you look at the top card of your deck and choose to put it on top or bottom. A divinity effect, as we like to call it, or a divination effect. And then she has a Mega Blast. If her attack hits, you can Soul Blast 8 and Counterblast 5 and draw up to 5 cards. You will not use her Mega Blast very often in this deck, if at all. I have not yet had an opportunity to use it, but I don't think I would anyway, just because the deck doesn't need draw that badly most of the time. CEO is more of a gateway to play Goddess of the Sun. Okay, Goddess of the Sun's abilities are also many. She has Lord, obviously, which means you don't want to play any non-Oracle Think Tanks in the deck. If you have CEO in the Soul, she gets plus 2k, making her a 13 permanently. And then she has a Limit Break 4. When she hits a Vanguard, you can Counterblast 2 and search your deck for any one Oracle Think Tank card. Show it to your opponent and put it in your hand and shuffle your deck. Now, this effect will rarely get off. Your opponent will try to stop you at every chance they can. And when they're at 4 damage, they're usually blocking anyway, so why not? So a couple of the things you can do with Goddess of the Sun is apply massive pressure to your opponent. They don't want that effect to go off any more than they want to take the damage anyway. You know that. So they're going to keep blocking her, but that allows you to put triggers onto your rear guards, namely Tom and Susanoo. Get major numbers going, make it so that they can't guard well. Eventually you wear them down. And while that's a really risky strategy, it is effective for this particular deck. The main reason to play this deck is that there are alternate ways to get the cross ride going. Because of Inaba, you can get the 13k Goddess of the Sun going as early as turn 3. You would ride the Goddess of the Sun and then use Inaba to put CEO into the Soul. Now, having a 13k vanilla doesn't sound like it would be very much, but you'd be surprised at how many things you get to do based on the fact that your opponent has to attack for a lot more to get going, and they are also blocking a lot more because once you hit LB4, they don't want you to get that effect. So my suggestion and strategy with this deck is to get the 13k out as quickly as you can. Use draw triggers, use whatever help you have, and put immense pressure on them to keep their hand low while you get this 13k going on the field. Once you have the 13k, it is a straight vanilla deck for the most part. If they do let you get off Goddess of the Sun's effect, take stock of what your hand is. If you have 2 or 3 perfect shields, you could grab a grade 3 from your deck just to thin your deck of grade 3s and to give yourself fodder for the ejection process. If they've been doing a good job of keeping your rear guards at bay, you get out a Susanoo or a Wise Man. If you don't have any perfect shields, you can grab a perfect shield. If you haven't hit milk, maybe that's what you'll grab. But it always depends on your field in hand at that time. So it requires a lot of thought from you based on what you think your opponent has set up for you in the future. And more or less, that's the end of my deck profile. I hope you guys enjoy it. I encourage you to try it as is before the comments flood in of why I'm not using this or that. I gotta admit to you, there's a lot of reasons that this deck is not my favorite of the OTT builds. And mainly it's because it's not as efficient at the ability OTT usually gives you as other OTT decks. I did try a build of this that was Tsukiyomi based, and it had 3 of the grade 3 Tsukiyomi, 3 Goddess of the Sun, and 2 CEOs. And it was basically trying to soul charge the CEO while playing basically a Suki deck until the time was right. That deck was very effective. However, instead of it feeling like a Goddess of the Sun build, it felt like a bad Tsukiyomi build. And there's no reason to run an ineffective Tsukiyomi build when you can just run a good Tsukiyomi build. So that's why I came up with this build. I hope that you guys like it. Like, comment, and subscribe. Check out what you can. See if you guys can come up with some ideas that I didn't think of. And I will talk to you guys soon.